like being old and useless," my son Daniel said, kicking an empty beer can so it skittered across my patio and into the flower bed where my begonias used to bloom. "Ask your wife," I replied sweetly, nodding toward the streak of orange foundation she'd left smeared across my white leather pool chair. The laugh that rose from my throat was soft and controlled, the kind of laugh that made Daniel's smirk falter for a fraction of a second. My backyard, the space I'd cared for like a second child for over 3 decades, looked like it had been attacked by a hurricane made of beer, cheap perfume, and bad decisions. The once clear pool water was murky with floating pizza crusts, empty plastic cups, and something that looked suspiciously like a pair of sequined bikini bottoms tangled in the skimmer net. The patio furniture was wet, sticky, and dotted with cigarette burns. My carefully arranged rose bushes were trampled flat where someone had clearly decided the flower bed made a good shortcut from the pool to the cooler. The smell was the worst of it. Chlorine mixed with spilled tequila and the faint sour tang of vomit hiding somewhere I hadn't yet found. They had told me it would be a small pool gathering. Daniel had said it with that bright-eyed charm he'd inherited from his father, and Marissa, his wife, had pressed her manicured hand over mine at the kitchen table. "Just a few friends, Mom. We'll take care of everything. You won't even know we were here." I agreed, because sometimes the easiest way to keep peace with your grown children is to trust them and hope they respect the home you built. But respect, I was learning yet again, was a language they had never bothered to learn. I had woken up early that morning to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking at the fence and stepped outside to a scene so grotesque it took me a moment to realize it was my own home. My first instinct had been to yell, to call Daniel and Marissa and demand they come clean it right now. Instead, I went back inside, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen island, letting the steam from the mug warm my face as I thought. Anger is a loud thing when you're young, but when you're my age, it gets quieter, sharper, more deliberate. I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures from every angle, making sure to capture every beer can, every broken bottle, every cigarette butt floating in my pool. Then I texted my neighbor Carla to ask if her security camera had picked up anything from the party. She responded almost instantly, "Oh, honey, you're going to want to see this." I spent the next 3 hours cleaning, but it wasn't out of kindness or duty. It was preparation. As I fished soggy chips from the pool and scrubbed sticky alcohol stains from the patio, I was building my case. The scrape of the broom on tile became a metronome for my thoughts. They thought I was a pushover. They thought they could treat my home like a free event venue. They thought wrong. By the time Daniel called me around noon, his voice sluggish and thick, saying they had crashed at a friend's place and would swing by later, I was ready. "No need," I told him. "I've already handled everything." The pause on the other end of the line was almost satisfying. Almost. "Thanks, Mom," he said, as if I'd done him a favor. I hung up without another word. I didn't need thanks. I needed him to understand something he'd never been forced to learn, that my home is not his playground, and my kindness is not a bottomless well. And I knew exactly how I was going to teach him.
Daniel had always been the kind of son who assumed the world would forgive his mistakes before he even made them. I could trace it back to his teenage years, when he'd borrow the car without asking, return it on fumes, and flash that boyish grin that had the power to melt my resolve. Back then, I chalked it up to youth, to him still learning his place in the world. But somewhere along the way, he stopped learning and started expecting. This pool party mess wasn't an accident. It was entitlement, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding a cheap beer. The week before the party, I remember sitting at my kitchen table, sunlight streaming in through the lace curtains, when Daniel brought it up. He'd come over with Marissa, both of them talking fast, layered in compliments that felt like cotton candy, sweet but dissolving into nothing. "Mom, your backyard is perfect for a little summer get-together," Daniel said, glancing out at the pool. "Just a few close friends, maybe a barbecue," Marissa added. "It'll be so nice for you, too. You can meet some new people, relax, enjoy yourself. We'll take care of all the arrangements, all the cleanup. Promise." I'd looked at her, those manicured nails tapping on my countertop, and felt that old ache of wanting to believe my children when they offered something that sounded like kindness. I agreed. I even helped them plan. Picked up extra towels, stocked the fridge with sodas, bought fresh flowers for the patio table. I should have paid more attention to the guest list they'd left on the counter, scrawled in Daniel's lazy handwriting, filled with names I didn't recognize. The day of the party, they'd arrived early, carrying bags of chips, bottles of cheap liquor, and boxes of frozen appetizers. I noticed right away that there was no barbecue grill, no proper food, nothing that suggested the calm afternoon gathering they'd promised. By noon, cars began lining my street, music thumped from portable speakers, and strangers were splashing into my pool with red cups in hand. I watched from the kitchen window as Marissa laughed with a tall man I'd never seen before, her drink sloshing dangerously close to my favorite outdoor rug. Daniel was nowhere in sight. I stepped outside once, meaning at least to greet the guests, but was nearly bowled over by two women racing toward the bathroom, dripping water across my hardwood floors. "Sorry, lady," one called over her shoulder, not bothering to stop. I knew then that this wasn't my gathering anymore, it was theirs, and I was just the landlord they were freeloading from. By late afternoon, the noise was unbearable. My neighbor, Carla, texted me, "Do you know these people? They're tossing beer bottles over the fence into my yard." I told her I'd handle it, though what I really wanted was to call the police. But that would only escalate things, and I needed more than an immediate fix. I needed a long-term solution, something Daniel and Marissa couldn't charm their way out of. The breaking point came around dusk. I was standing at the sink, rinsing dishes when I saw Daniel, my Daniel, standing on the diving board, microphone in hand, leading the crowd in some kind of drinking chant. The pool water was dark with bodies and trash, and that's when I remembered something most people in that yard didn't know. The house, the land, the pool, they were mine alone. I'd bought Daniel out of his share years ago when I refinanced after his father passed, making me the sole owner. And tucked away in my files was a clause I'd had written into my property use agreement, a legal stipulation that anyone causing damage to my property during an event without my consent could be held financially liable for full restoration costs. It wasn't just a warning, it was binding. And I suddenly realized this small gathering had just become the perfect test case. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I let the party burn itself out, and I retreated to my bedroom with a quiet smile. They had no idea what was coming. By the time the last shout died down and the bass from the speakers finally stopped rattling the windows, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I waited until I heard the screech of tires pulling away before stepping into the backyard. The patio lights flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the wreckage. The smell hit me first. Chlorine mixed with stale beer, smoke, and something rotten. Empty chip bags clung to the edges of the pool like seaweed, glass bottles balanced precariously on the steps, and soggy paper plates floated lazily on the surface. The teak table I'd spent years saving for was covered in sticky rings, cigarette ash, and a single half-eaten burger that had been smashed into the wood like someone had tried to make a point with it. My stomach turned, not from the mess itself, but from what it meant. This wasn't just careless, it was deliberate disrespect. I thought of Daniel, and how just an hour earlier I'd watched him wrap an arm around Marissa's waist, laughing as one of their friends tipped an entire cooler of beer into the shallow end. "It's your mom's place," one of them had said, as though that made it theirs to ruin. I stepped carefully across the wet stone, my slippers squelching with each move, and started picking up what I could. My fingers curled around beer cans, sticky from whatever had spilled across them, and I tossed them into a trash bag with mechanical precision. My mind was somewhere else entirely, ticking through what I knew about my property clause. I had the paperwork in a locked drawer inside the hall cabinet, pages I had signed in a lawyer's office 5 years ago, never thinking I'd have to use them on my own child. The clause was clear. Any event hosted without proper adherence to the agreed-upon conditions, guest limits, cleanup responsibilities, damage control, meant the hosts were liable for restoration costs plus a breach penalty. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was the kind of penalty that made people think twice before taking liberties. I realized I had something else, too. Careless security footage. I could already picture the neat compilation, Daniel popping open another beer on the diving board, Marissa grinding a cigarette into the arm of my patio chair, guests dragging muddy feet through my living room. Every second was evidence, not just of damage, but of negligence. My hands moved faster now, sweeping confetti into piles, fishing plastic cups from the pool with the skimmer, pulling a sticky wad of something unidentifiable from the filter. Each piece of trash was another nail in the coffin of Daniel's argument if he tried to play innocent. By the time I finally came inside, it was nearly 3 a.m. The living room smelled faintly of cologne and spilled tequila. Someone had knocked over the vase of fresh flowers I'd bought for the party, and the water had warped the corner of the rug. I knelt to mop it up, my knees aching, and thought of how Daniel used to sit cross-legged in this very spot when he was little, building Lego castles and looking up at me with that wide, trusting smile. Somewhere between those afternoons and this night, something in him had shifted. I was too tired to mourn it now. Instead, I pulled the paperwork from the cabinet, set it on the kitchen island, and spread out the pages. There it was, in neat legal print, signed by both of us, the clause, the liability, the penalties, all perfectly enforceable. I placed Carla's message beside it as a reminder. Her footage was just a text away. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt resolved. The mess outside was temporary. The lesson I was about to teach him would last far longer.
Daniel and Marissa didn't show up until nearly noon the next day, strolling in like they'd just returned from a spa retreat instead of leaving me to scrub their chaos for hours. Daniel had on sunglasses despite the cloudy sky, his hair still damp from a shower somewhere else, and Marissa carried an iced coffee the size of her forearm. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, dropping onto one of my kitchen stools like he owned the place. "Hope it wasn't too bad this morning. We figured you'd call if you needed help." I didn't look up from the stack of paperwork I'd been reviewing. "Too bad?" I said evenly. "You mean the broken bottles, the cigarette burns, the beer in the pool filter, and the damage to my teep table?" Marissa sipped her drink, clearly trying to look unbothered. "Oh, come on, Elena. It's just a few things. We can get a cleaning crew to come by later this week." "Later this week," I repeated, my voice like the edge of a knife. I slid the papers toward them, the crisp sound breaking the air between us. "You might want to read this first." Daniel frowned, tugging off his sunglasses. "What is this?" "The property use agreement you signed when you moved back to town and started borrowing my home for your events?" I tapped the clause with my finger, my nail clicking sharply on the paper. "Any damages or violations result in full restoration costs and a penalty. And thanks to Carla's security cameras, I have all the proof I need." Marissa's smirk faltered. "Wait, you're not serious. That's for strangers or renters, not for family." I looked at her for a long moment. Family doesn't treat my home like a public dump. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're really going to make us pay for this?" "Not just pay," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "You're going to learn that respect isn't optional. I've already contacted the restoration service. They'll send me the bill, and I'll forward it to you, along with the penalty." Marissa slammed her coffee down a little too hard, splashing it onto the counter. "This is ridiculous. It's not like you can't afford it. You've got the money." That was the moment something in me shifted from stern to ice cold. I have the money because I don't throw it away on fixing problems caused by people who don't care. And I care about my home. I care about the respect I'm owed in it. Daniel tried one last angle, softening his voice like he used to when he wanted to borrow my car at 16. "Mom, come on. We didn't mean anything by it. Let's just forget it and move on." I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that lets someone know the decision's already made. "I'm not angry, Daniel. I'm disappointed, and I'm making sure this never happens again." I stood, gathering the papers. "You have a week to get me the payment. If you don't, I'll be sending this to my lawyer. And just so we're clear, there will be no more parties here. Ever." The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel's shoulders slumped, and Marissa stared at me like she couldn't believe I'd just spoken to them that way. But I had. And I meant every word. This was no longer about a messy backyard. It was about boundaries that had been crossed too many times, and finally locking the gate behind them. The first call came 2 days later. Daniel's voice was tight, clipped, the way it got when he was trying to keep control but knew he was losing it. "Mom, the estimate you sent me is insane. $10,000 for restoration services? You've got to be kidding." I leaned back in my chair, the afternoon sun warm on my shoulders, as I held the phone to my ear. "It's not a joke, Daniel. That's the cost of undoing what you and your friends did to my property, and that's before the penalty." He swore under his breath, forgetting that I could hear him. We can't pay that, he said finally, a note of desperation creeping in. We've got bills, we've got... You had money for kegs, cheap liquor, and a mountain of takeout. You'll find it for this. He started in on another excuse, but I cut him off. You have 5 days left before I send this to my lawyer. After that, it's out of my hands. I ended the call before he could answer. That evening, I received an email from Marissa. It was a long, rambling thing about how families should support each other, how she felt attacked by my actions, and how I was punishing them over a harmless party. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a note, "Please keep for record." Over the next few days, Carla sent me clips from her security footage. And one, Daniel was laughing as his friend sprayed beer into the pool. And another, Marissa stubbed a cigarette out on my patio armchair. And yet another, a group of strangers were tossing empty bottles over the fence into Carla's yard. I saved every single one. By day 4, Daniel called again. But this time he wasn't defensive, he was worried. "Mom, Marissa is furious. She says you're ruining our reputation. People are talking." "Good," I said simply. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before turning someone's home into a dump." There was a long pause. "So this is it then? You're just cutting us off?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm holding you accountable. You've had years of taking without giving back. This time, you pay the price." That night, I opened a folder on my laptop labeled Daniel, Party. Inside were all the photos, the videos, the receipts from the restoration company, and copies of our signed agreement. I didn't enjoy organizing them, but I did it with a kind of grim satisfaction. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was about setting a precedent. People, even your own children, treat you the way you allow them to treat you, and I was done allowing this. On the 5th day, my phone pinged with a bank transfer notification. $10,000 labeled party damages. No apology, no message, just payment. It should have felt like victory, but what I felt instead was a deep, aching sadness. This was the price of standing your ground. Sometimes it bought you respect, but it cost you closeness. I looked out at my restored backyard, clean, quiet, mine again, and told myself that dignity was worth the trade. The first ripple of fallout hit at the monthly neighborhood meeting. I hadn't planned on mentioning the party, but Carla did, standing up during the open discussion portion and holding her phone like it was a loaded weapon. "I think we should address the noise and property damage from last Saturday," she said, her voice carrying just enough steel to slice through the room's chatter. She played one of the clips. Daniel, red-faced and grinning, beer spraying from a can in his hand as the crowd roared. There was no mistaking my patio, my pool, or my son. A murmur went through the room, and a few people shot me sympathetic looks. I stayed silent, letting the footage speak for itself. Someone asked if I'd filed a complaint with the HOA. Carla glanced at me, and I gave her the smallest of nods. "Yes," she said, "and Elena has every right to." By the end of the meeting, word had spread like wildfire. The neighborhood Facebook group lit up with comments about disrespect, entitlement, and grown adults acting like teenagers. I knew Marissa would see it. She practically lived online. 2 days later, I got a text from her. It was short. "Hope you're happy. Everyone thinks we're trash now." I didn't respond. A week passed before Daniel showed up on my doorstep. He looked older somehow, like the easy arrogance he carried had been sanded down by public shame. "Mom," he began, shifting from one foot to the other. "I didn't realize. I didn't think it would blow up like this." I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "Actions have consequences, Daniel. You treated my home like it was disposable. You acted like my kindness was your entitlement. This," I gestured to the silence between us, "is what comes of that." He ran a hand through his hair. "People at work are talking. Marissa's friends aren't returning her calls. She's upset." I almost laughed. Upset because she's embarrassed, not because she's sorry. He didn't argue. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table, his gaze drifting to the neatly stacked paperwork still sitting in the corner. "You really had all this planned, didn't you?" "No," I said. "I had boundaries planned. You crossed them, I enforced them." For the first time in years, Daniel didn't try to charm his way out. He just nodded slowly, like the truth was finally sinking in. "I guess I didn't think you'd ever push back." "That was your mistake," I said softly. "I've spent too long letting things slide for the sake of peace, but peace without respect isn't worth having." He left a few minutes later, quieter than I'd ever seen him, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty chair he'd just vacated, wondering if this was the start of a change in him or just a temporary dent in his armor. Either way, I knew I'd done what needed to be done.
Weeks passed, and the summer heat began to fade, taking with it the last traces of that disastrous day. My backyard had been restored. New cushions on the chairs, the teak table sanded and sealed, the pool sparkling under the afternoon sun. But something between Daniel and me remained fractured. We spoke occasionally, polite but careful, as though both of us were walking on a glass floor that might crack with the wrong step. I saw less of Marissa. Word around town was that she'd taken the whole ordeal as a personal humiliation. Some of her so-called friends had started hosting gatherings without inviting her, and the ones who did seemed to keep things low-key, perhaps fearing her reputation would follow them. One afternoon, I was trimming my roses when I saw Daniel standing awkwardly by the gate. He wasn't carrying himself like the son who once strode into my home without knocking. He seemed smaller, somehow, hesitant. "Need some help?" he asked. I handed him the pruning shears without a word. For the next hour, we worked side by side, the silence between us heavy but not hostile. Eventually, he said, "You know, when you sent that bill, it felt like a betrayal, but now I think I get it. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were showing me something I should have seen a long time ago." I paused, the shears in my hand catching the light. "I was showing you that love isn't the same as letting people walk all over you. I was showing you that I matter, Daniel. My home matters. And if you respect me, you respect both." He nodded, looking down at the ground like a boy who'd just been told off for tracking mud into the house. "I don't know if I can fix things with everyone else," he said quietly, "but I want to fix things with you." There was a lump in my throat I hadn't expected. For years, I'd wanted him to see me as more than just a resource, a place to crash, a wallet to tap, a backyard to exploit, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to. "We'll see," I said softly, turning back to my roses. "Respect isn't a promise you make once. It's something you show, every day." As he left that afternoon, I noticed the way he closed the gate behind him, careful not to let it slam. It was a small thing, but it felt like the first brick in a new foundation between us. Autumn settled over the neighborhood in slow, golden waves, the leaves drifting into the pool in a way that felt peaceful instead of messy. I had started hosting small afternoon teas for a few close friends, people who treated my home like the sanctuary it was. The laughter was softer now, the kind that didn't leave behind broken glass or cigarette burns. One Saturday, I was setting out a plate of almond cookies when I heard the gate creak open. Daniel stepped inside, carrying a small wooden box. "Made this for you," he said, setting it on the table. It was a handcrafted holder for my gardening tools, each slot lined with soft fabric so the metal wouldn't scratch. I ran my fingers over the smooth edges, the care in every joint. "It's beautiful," I said quietly. He shrugged, but his eyes were searching mine. Figured it was time I gave something back. We sat there for a while, sipping tea in the cool air, not talking much. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like a space where trust might grow again. And for the first time since that awful party, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who once brought me a dandelion crown and said I was the queen of our backyard. I knew things wouldn't be perfect. We would still have our disagreements, and there would be days when the memory of past disrespect would sting. But I also knew I had set a boundary and kept it, and that had changed something important, not just in him, but in me. I wasn't just his mother anymore. I was a woman who respected herself enough to demand the same from others. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Daniel stood to leave. He paused at the gate, turning back with a small smile. "Thanks for giving me another chance." I nodded, feeling that lump in my throat again. "Don't waste it." He left, and I stood there in the fading light, holding the little wooden box, feeling the quiet strength of knowing I had reclaimed not just my home, but my place in it. And maybe, just maybe, I'd taught him something that would last longer than the shame of a single party. If you've ever had to fight to be respected, by family, by friends, by anyone, then you know the strength it takes to stand your ground. Tell me in the comments if you've ever been in my shoes, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Your voice matters here, just like mine did in my own home.